New polls are suggesting that nearly half of Canadians between the ages of 18 and 34 would vote to become American if they got their Canadian dollars converted to American and they got instant citizenship. Now, this is absolutely wild. People wanting to give up Canada, give up their Canadian identity. To a lot of people, it makes no sense at all. And I personally don't think it's that great an idea. We got a lot of natural resources in Canada, a lot of natural benefits to having an independent country. But you start to think about it just a little bit more, and you start to understand how particularly the young people could get to the point where they're voting this kind of way in the poll. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the incredible intellectual dishonesty that I think a lot of young Canadians are finally starting to get their heads around, even if a lot of other Canadians aren't seeing it yet. But there's also been a lot of concern about one clip in particular that came out just a couple of days ago, a clip that surfaced recently. This clip where the presumed next Prime Minister of Canada makes some statements that people are taking issue with and taking a big issue with it. A bunch of people making a ton of noise online claiming that this clip says, and the statements made in the clips, that we are entering the end of democracy in Canada and that extreme powers might be used to take control of Canada. Is that true? Is that not? I see things a little bit differently than a lot of people I'm seeing online. I've got to talk to you about that. But of course, this is the Russ Matthews Show. Thank you for joining me. Lots to talk about today. It's going to be an interesting episode for sure. And if you don't, if you're listening on YouTube right now, it might be news to you that you can find this podcast all over the internet and wherever you like to listen to your podcast most. Right now, we've got it on YouTube, we've got it on Spotify, we've got it on Apple Music, and we got it on Amazon Podcasts. So feel free to check it out there, and you can find the links in the description to do so. Fantastic. Now, we got to talk about this polling, this poll that came out, and there's a big difference in Canada now when it comes to the difference between younger generations and older generations, and that's might not be surprising to some, but why it's happening, that might be a little bit more surprising. Take a look at this. This is the what everyone's making a whole bunch of noise about today. If the United States offered all Canadians full U.S. citizenship and a full conversion of the Canadian dollar, all personal financial assets into U.S. dollars, I would vote for Canada to become a part of the U.S. This is what the poll is asking. Now, different responses for different age groups. We see 55 plus, people older than 55, only 17% of them voting for that, with 35 to 54 at 33%, and 18 to 34 at a whopping 43%. Not far off of half of all young Canadians saying, I would vote in favor of this if it were to be under these terms with this conversion of US dollars. Now, that is an argument in and of itself, saying, hey, the Canadian dollar is weak right now, 30% gain on my cash savings. If someone has a lot of cash, well, I could see a benefit here. What does it say about them in Canada and their view of the US, or is it more financial? All of these things can be talked about with this poll, but I think that that's not the most interesting thing here. The most interesting thing here is the extreme divergence, this extreme difference that we see between young Canadians and older Canadians with how they feel about the country and how attached to it they are. Now, we're going to get into conversation about why they're feeling that way, but we got to first talk about, okay, how are young people versus old people different in the way that they're viewing things? In my eyes, and this isn't to lump everyone else together, it seems to me that younger generations are now becoming more critical of the typical narratives that they're hearing in the news and in other places, and they're kind of looking to their own lived experience rather than being told how to feel about something. In my personal experience, most of the younger people that I talk to will have a good idea of the different arguments that can be made on both sides of any given issue. It could be due to a lack of dependence on traditional media, something that we see in the older generations usually. Again, not lumping everyone together here. But you find yourself as a young person talking to a lot of older Canadians and trying to make a devil's advocate kind of argument about anything. And it seems like they can't wrap their heads around it, or a lot of people can't wrap their heads around how there could be another view than the view that they're being told to think, right? Because let me make this a little bit more clear. Let's talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. And there's two different clear stories being told about that conflict right now. There's two clear stories. The Western one, that we heard at the very beginning of the war, when everyone put up their Ukrainian lawn signs after not knowing anything about Ukraine for 10 years, and then all of a sudden you got a lawn sign. A little bit odd. A little bit odd. But the story that was being told was there was this unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, and to oversimplify the story, Putin is trying to take over all of Europe. He's going to go to Ukraine, and then he's going to go to Belarus. He's going to take over more and more of Europe. It's a global conquest to reunite the Soviet Union. This is kind of the idea that a lot of people have in their heads about why what's happening is happening. And if you try to talk to somebody who only sees that and talk about any of the other possibilities, well, they just get pretty angry at you, because there's another side to the story as well. And we'll just make this brief. The Russian side of the story is, hey, we don't want a military alliance at our border. There's all this chatter about making Ukraine a NATO member. And as a result, having a military alliance that we're not in right on our border with potential arms and NATO weapons in that country. Obviously, a little bit concerning for national security. This is the argument that Russia's making. They're saying we wouldn't have invaded if you put on paper that Ukraine wouldn't be a NATO country. And we might stop the war if you put that on paper now. This is the Russian story. But there are two clear stories and two ways of thinking about what this conflict is. Now, I think that the rational view is to say we're getting each of these stories from our individual governments and from our individual news media sources. You can believe one, you can believe the other, but we should be able to come together at the very least in our uncertainty. Because I made both of these arguments, the Western story, the Russian story, and it's incredibly hard for me to say which one is true and which one is not, because I'm having to rely on all kinds of media that I'm putting together, but it's incredibly challenging to know what is true. So I think the take is, hey, I might think that this is true, you might think that this is true, but at least we can unite in saying, hey, we could be having the wool pull over our eyes from both sides. So it's incredibly hard to be 100% certain on anything these days. What is truth? What is real? This is all to make a point about the difference between younger people and older people in the way that they tend to think about things. And I experienced it firsthand just this week. A couple of days ago, I went out to play some pickup shinny hockey. We played the whole game and all this. It was fine. Everyone's having a good time. And get back into the locker room. And this is the day after the first hockey game for this Four Nation Cup thing, where U.S., Canada, Finland, and Sweden are all competing best on best international. I'm a big hockey guy, super into it. That's not the point. The point is, the conversation that happened in the locker room after we were done playing was, oh, wouldn't it be nice to see the Russian players here compete internationally? We've got some of the best players in the world are Russian, and to have a best on best tournament without them, a lot of people are up in arms with that. And everybody below the age of 30 in the room, or maybe below the age of 35 in the room, was saying, yeah, it's hard to make up your mind about the political actions of countries and hard to know what's going on there. But at the very least, we should be able to have international competition with athletes, even if they're in, like we did in the Olympics, take them away and don't make it so tightly tied to Russia and the Russian government, just a representation of the athletes from that country. At the very least, have some competition. And a lot of people in the room were like, yeah, that'd be awesome. I just want to see the highest level international sport. But there were a couple of older gentlemen, probably around 60, 65, that were saying to us young people in the room, I can't believe you guys are supporting this communist regime. They're trying to take over the world, and you're saying that we should have their athletes compete. And it was just, it made me step back a little bit and think, okay, well, there's very clearly differences in the way that we're consuming our media and how certain we are about the media that we're consuming. I found that really interesting. But all this is just to say, there is a divide between generations here. There's a big divide between generations here. And again, I'll say this and I'll make the point, obviously not lumping everyone in. If you're listening to this and you're 55, 65, 75, any age, I'm not saying this about you specifically. You're the minority listening to this type of stuff, listening to this content. And I'm sure a lot of other stuff that's giving you alternative perspectives to maybe some of your friends, some of the people that you talk with. Maybe you've experienced a similar thing. But this divide between generations and between generations and political views is getting farther and farther apart when it comes to how we think about our country. And that's the explanation for this poll, this difference where nearly half of Canadians 18 to 34 are saying, I'm not so certain that I'm getting a lot of benefit from being here in Canada. I'll emphasize again, don't think it's a great idea to move and to become a state. I don't think that's a great idea. What I'm talking about is, why are people answering this poll in this way? How do we get here? Why have we gotten here? What can we do to change the way that people feel about their country? It's a tough challenge, and it's a conversation about patriotism and identity. Who are we as Canadians? I want to start off by showing you a clip for this discussion, because there was recently, and I talked about this a little bit in the intro, there was recently a big press conference, or I guess it was more of like a speech or like a rally for Mark Carney, who is the presumed next Prime Minister of Canada. He's talking in Kelowna, BC here. This happened just a few days ago. And a lot of interesting clips came out of this talk about fentanyl, how he thinks it's not a big issue here in Canada. It is one in the States, kind of making a lot of people who have lost family members in Canada to the crisis feel a little bit pissed off. But I digress. That's not what we're talking about. There were other clips in it about the extreme emergency powers that he may use for his own goals. We're going to talk about that later in the episode. But what I want to show you here is something about what we were talking about, something about Canadian identity and who are we, what are the things that set us apart, and what is the there's some frustrating. Let me show you the clip first, and then we'll get into the details of it, because I found it really, really interesting. Take a listen to this.
Be New Orleans, be Louisiana, Quebec. In America, healthcare is a big business. It's not a right. In America, the social safety net has gaping holes in it through which tens of millions of people fall every year. America is not Canada. And Canada will never, ever be part of America in any way, shape, or form.
He says this to big applause in the room in Kelowna, BC. He lists the bad things that are, I think everyone would agree, are a part of America. You got a healthcare system where people, they fall, break their leg, and all of a sudden they're in $30,000 of medical debt and they can't get out of it, and it slows their life down and stops them from doing the things that they want to do in their life. It's awful. It's horrible. He lists these bad things. He says there's a social safety net in America that isn't much of a net. It's got some big holes in it. People fall through it. People aren't taken care of in America. He says these things and says, okay, now look at Canada. Our defining factor is we are not American. We will never be a part of America. Okay. To a round of applause, he says this quote, and it sounds good, right? We are strong. We are Canadians. We are different than those people. And we certainly are. There are differences. But it's hard to be patriotic when the very problems that you're pointing at in America, Canadians, these are the things that Canadians define themselves about. Like we've got healthcare, we've got a different economy, we handle things differently here in Canada. But it's hard to be patriotic when you look at those things that we previously sort of built our identity around, and we're saying, hey, our opportunities are declining. These things that we are so proud of, we're not seeing these positive results in the same way that perhaps we used to. We're going to get into this in more detail. I've felt the most patriotic that I ever have felt in the past probably 10 years watching this international hockey tournament. I'm revealing my what I'm into most. It's probably because I'm a little bit hockey obsessed, watching it, playing it these days. I got a little bit of a one-track mind, so I tie everything to this stuff. Bear with me. Bear with me. I ask you to bear with me on this show, as you should bear with everyone in your life. But I felt the most patriotic there is hearing the Canadian national anthem, rallying around this sport. Maybe that's just me, though. I'm getting too far into the hockey side of things. But we get this sense of self from being not American, and that's what Carney is appealing to in this clip. And I think it's a good move. It's a good move to sort of make people feel like, yeah, we're going to get behind you so that you can fight this fight for us. But you also, if you were watching on YouTube, you might have seen in this clip, it's a bunch of people. The room is predominantly filled by people who are over the age of 50. These are the people that are answering differently on the initial poll that we were talking about than the rest of the people who have answered that poll. Because we got to look at the declining quality of these things that make us Canadian. The thing, like, we look at Canada and we say, what a fantastic thing it is that we have universal health care. People aren't going into massive debt, having their lives ruined. This is fantastic. And the fact that there's no medical bankruptcy in Canada, I would be willing to pay more in taxes than the average US citizen to continue to have this. I think it's something that's important. But you get less patriotic about it when you sort of see the state of the healthcare system in Canada. We use this thing to define us, like look at the positive benefits that we have from being Canadian. But then you go to the emergency room and you see people that have been waiting on chairs or in beds in hallways for 7-8 hours to get seen. You see people waiting 3 years on a waiting list to try to get a family doctor so you can see people outside of the emergency room, outside of the walk-in clinic. You hear stories about people waiting 2.5, 3 years on a referral call. You just got to wait your turn in line. And meanwhile, you could have degenerating health issues, right? Getting worse and worse as the wait goes on. I'm not saying we don't have it good in Canada in terms of not having to pay for this. What I am saying is that using this to define us as how we are different from Americans, to a lot of people, it becomes less of a compelling argument when you see the way that our healthcare system has been declining. Like here's a personal story. A couple of years ago, I was super lucky to be able to go with my fiance to do a trip in South America. We went to Peru and Bolivia primarily. But I had a little bit of a medical emergency, got kidney stones, a whopper, like a 5 millimeter kidney stone in La Paz, Bolivia, the highest elevated capital in the world, I believe that was. Super high elevation. You got to take like altitude sickness pills to be there, all this stuff. But we show up, get to our Airbnb, and I'm keeled over in the most pain I've been in my life the next morning. And luckily, there was a hospital nearby. We went there. They diagnosed the issue. I was like, oh, that makes sense. My dad's had a bunch of kidney stones. He's had it like 5 times. Maybe it's kind of something that becomes more likely if it's in your family. I don't know if it's one of those things. But we get there. I get the procedure done, all this. They remove the kidney stone. But they tell me, yeah, this would have been $10,000 US if you didn't have this travel health insurance. And thank God I did. But then I started thinking, well, what if this happened 3 weeks later and I was back in Canada? I've heard stories of friends going through a similar experience where instead of doing the procedure that was relatively painless, not brutal recovery, instead they were forced to, because of the lack of resources, wait for weeks in pain, and weeks in pain, trying to pass these kidney stones to get rid of them because of a lack of resources. We can't treat you right now. We've got to put you through this more painful process. That's something in my personal life that I was like, thank God I was in another country. People would think of this as like an undeveloped country, but if whether or not that's actually true, like the medical care there was wonderful. Doctors were wonderful. But I wonder, would I have gotten the same kind of medical care if I was in my home country? A wild thing to think. Now, it's not just healthcare, though, right? Because we talk about a social safety net. This is the other thing that Carney was saying, that, well, in America, we don't have a great social safety net. In Canada, we've got a great social safety net. I think that would be a hard argument to make for a lot of the people living in Canada with disabilities. With a disability, there's not really great disability benefits. Each province has their own sort of small program. But to make like we in Canada have no gaps, no holes in our social safety net, our EI system doesn't even account for gig workers and people who have multiple small jobs, which becomes more and more common these days as you're trying to make ends meet, because people aren't earning as much as they used to, and the social safety net doesn't help a whole lot for the people that have these types of jobs. EI doesn't work for them. A lot of times this disability benefits aren't enough to get by. So to make this point that we are not the US, we are not like the US because we have such a strong social safety net, because our healthcare is fantastic, these arguments don't ring as true for Canadians as they used to. And we talk about the economic benefits of why people might be saying this kind of stuff. Again, I don't think it's a great idea for Canada to be the 51st state. That's not my take. But we look at a chart like this. If you're listening in on the podcast audio only, we've got a chart here that shows all of the different areas in the States and in Canada that and what their average earning is, or what their median earning is. So like the middle rate of people, rather than the average that could be skewed by the extreme lows and the extreme highs. This is the median. And we scroll down the chart and we see that, even the poorest states are earning more than the richest provinces. And so when you start to make that economic argument, it's like, why we are similar to the States, except we have more natural resources. We have a lot of space, a lot of people, a lot of highly trained technical people. We out of Waterloo and all of these sort of software tech training places. So why are we earning so much less? I think part of it's brain drain. A lot of our best are going to the States to work for companies simply because of these economic realities where people can earn more in the States than they can in Canada. People will jump ship, and it's not a lack of national pride. It's a reality. I'm going to make the decisions that's best for me and my family, and that's what I think is happening here. People are starting to think, well, things aren't feeling all that great for me here. So the tie to patriotism is a little bit less. It's a little bit less. And then you pair this, earning less, with prospects of home ownership, of owning a home in Canada. It's getting farther and farther away. And the average income in Canada, two of the average income in Canada, in most markets, is far, far away from being able to purchase just the average home, right? You'd think that average incomes should result in average home. You can understand some people not being able to afford to get into real estate because of a low income, right? A lower than average income. But there's people with, by all means, above average incomes that can't afford below average homes. Right? There's a big issue here in Canada when it comes to that. And it's not just economic, it's also social, it's also cultural. How many people are going to feel comfortable to grow a family of the size that they want if they don't have a stable home base for it? I got super lucky in this regard. Back in 2019, I made the perhaps unwise, depending on which way things went after it, but the perhaps unwise decision to leverage myself to the gills, take on a bunch of debt to buy a home in 2019 with just 5% down. I was lucky that things went the way that they did. That's a risky position to put yourself in. My leverage to the gills, took on a lot of debt to do it, but then I got lucky because homes appreciated over the next 4 or 5 years. Now, it could have very easily gone the other way, but it didn't. And you shouldn't miss out on being able to get into markets because of your timing. You should be able to enter adulthood, hit the age of 22, 23, you got a good job, you got good job prospects, good room for growth, and be able to say, okay, I might have to go into some debt for this, but I can feasibly pay this off. I can feasibly do this and start a stable home base for me and my family. But the reality is, for most people, unless you got lucky and were extremely risky like me, in retrospect, luckily it worked out, but unless you took these extreme risks, well, you've been largely locked out of home ownership. It's just the reality of the situation. And these are the things that Canadians really want. It's not about numbers. It's not about how strong is our economy. We need a stronger economy for Canada. It's not about these performative high-level GDP growth numbers. I think it's about the ability to feel like you and your partner can get average jobs and support an average life with a couple of kids. And in that average life, be able to actually spend time with your friends and family. Spend time with the people that you love, and you not having to either get a gig working job or spend every waking hour of your life outside of work thinking about different side hustles that you can start up, different ways to make more money so that you can actually provide the life that you want to provide for your family. That people want to be able to spend time with their families, not just live to work, but work to live. This idea. And we want the belief that if you work hard and do the right things, that you can one day own a home and provide stability for that family. I don't think all of that is a lot to ask. I think that is a very, very challenging thing to actually achieve today in Canada. So you look at that original poll. Why are so many young Canadians saying, hey, well, if I can get a 30% markup on my dollars, if I can maybe get exposure to these higher wages and lower home prices, well, maybe I can look past some of the troubling things that I think about the U.S. right now, whatever policy you don't like there most. I think that there's some people saying, well, if that doesn't affect me directly, I'm going to have to look past it so that I can make the right choice for me and my family. You can see how people could get there. It gets a little bit less shocking. And the frustrating thing to me is that our politicians aren't talking about the why. So I just went over all of these things about why we're having these challenges, or what these challenges are, rather. What the financial challenges are, what the home ownership challenges are, the things that are making people respond to these polls in this way. Our politicians aren't talking about what is causing these things. They're identifying these issues. They're saying young Canadians aren't earning enough. They can't own a home. They're identifying the problems, but are being incredibly intellectually dishonest about why this is a reality. Why are we in a situation where wages are lower? Why are we in a situation with a runaway real estate market? Why are we in a situation with higher and higher and higher costs of goods, higher and higher cost of living? They'll say this is true, this is something that's happening, but they won't talk about, okay, like here are the symptoms, but what is the cause? What is the disease? What is the thing that is making it this way? You hear politicians identify the problem, but not the root of it. Here's a bunch of issues. Here's a bunch of symptoms. What is the root cause of it? And this pairs back into the clip I was showing you before, this press conference that was going on in Kelowna, BC. I want to show you another clip from this because there's a lot of talk here. But not a lot of detail. And I think you're going to find it pretty interesting. Listen to this.
The government's focused on outcomes, not money going in. We need a government that spends less, but gets the country to invest more. So my government will balance the spending budget within the first 3 years. Absolutely. The second thing we need to do is make sure that you can keep more of your hard-earned money. Yeah, you're welcome. You don't have to thank us. It's the other way around. And that attitude that it's your money, not the government's money, is essential when people are sitting around those tables in Ottawa. So my government will deliver a middle-class tax cut as well. Lots of young.
Okay. So middle-class tax cut, he ends that statement with. My government will deliver a middle-class tax cut. We will be cutting government spending to deliver a middle-class tax cut. The question is always, how? How are you going to deliver this middle-class tax cut? What are the details of it? Will that actually, and here's a question, is every tax cut good? Is every cut in taxes actually making a difference in the lives of Canadians? At what point is a marginal tax rate too marginal? And at what point should we be focused on the root cause rather than applying Band-Aid solutions? Now, this middle-class tax cut idea is not a new idea for campaigns, right? We've seen this before. We look back to the campaign in 2015 under Trudeau's first term. One of the things that he campaigned on most heavily was this middle-class tax cut. We recognize things are too hard for middle-class Canadians. There's been a destroying of the middle class, and we need to cut taxes for them. And this is what he talked about very frequently on the campaign trail, and to a certain extent did deliver a middle-class tax cut. Here's a clip.
Hi everyone. Last October, we promised Canadians real change right away. We promised to deliver a tax cut for middle-class Canadians by asking the wealthiest to pay a little more. Within weeks of forming government, we did just that. It was the fair and right thing to do, and the smart thing to do for Canada's economy. Real progress demands an inclusive economic vision that gives all Canadians a real and fair chance at success. That's why, in the upcoming budget, we'll also introduce the Canada Child Benefit, a bigger, tax-free, fair, automatic monthly child benefit. We will continue to put more money in the pockets of hard-working families, because we know when middle-class Canadians have more money to save, invest, and grow the economy, all of Canada benefits.
So Trudeau's answer to the question, how are we going to give this middle-class tax cut, is we're just going to ask the corporations at the very top to pay just a little bit more, and that's going to allow you to have this tax cut. That's what he did. That's what he did. It increased, he talked about corporations. The reality was there was an increase in the tax rate above $200,000, while people in the tax bracket of $45,000 to, I believe, $90,000 got a reduction by a couple percentage points in that range. Okay, that's not a bad thing. But I don't think that that's the be-all, end-all. I think that the policy that he's talking about bringing in as a result of it, this Canada Child Benefit, I think it's a good policy. We've got population issues in Canada. People aren't having enough children. We've got a fertility rate of 1.2%, I believe, 1.26, meaning that for every 2 Canadians, they will on average have 1.26 children, meaning there's some people that will just have 1, some people will have 2, a whole bunch of people will have none, a few people will have more than 2 if they can afford it. That's the main thing that's holding people back right now. So the idea of let's give money to families so that they can economically face the realities of having children in this world, not a bad policy, not a bad policy. But when you look at a tax cut like this 2% cut for people between $45,000 and $90,000, that bracket, you look at that at the end of the day and say, okay, well now, feeling the results of this 9 years later, despite this tax cut, I can buy less. I can use the same money that I'm earning, or maybe I'm getting charged a little bit less tax on it. But even as a result of this, I'm finding with that extra dollars that I don't have to pay in tax, I can even now buy less than I could before this tax cut was made. So are tax cuts the be-all and end-all? No. It feels like perhaps we're using Band-Aid solutions, addressing the symptoms instead of the disease. But to be frank, we're not even doing a great job of addressing the symptoms, right? We're not providing any kind of relief for people who are suffering from these symptoms. But not only that, we're not doing the important work that needs to be done to say, here is the thing that's actually causing this reality for Canadians. Here is the actual reality of what happened and how we're not going to let it happen again. This is how we get into the conversation about the intellectual dishonesty about what got us here. Because these people know. These people know what got us here. These people know why we're here. But will they say it? That's an entirely different story. But there are some good things in this clip from Carney as well. You might remember hearing him say, the government's going to spend less. The government's going to spend less, and that's how we're going to be able to give you another middle-class tax cut. Sounds good. We don't hear how that's going to happen. How are you going to get the government to spend less? Well, to me, that sounds like you've got to cut spending in some way. There's no way to spend less without cutting spending. But note the irony there. Note the irony there that we have a liberal prime minister who's going to be prime minister. I believe wholeheartedly he's going to be the next prime minister, Mark Carney. We've got a liberal prime minister here saying, we're going to cut government spending. We're going to make cuts to the government to make it so that we don't have to spend as much as a government to operate. And we'll be able to pass on these savings to you in the form of a middle-class tax cut. Does no one see the irony here? We've had years of the government claiming that you would be incredibly irresponsible to vote in any other government but us because these other governments are saying they're going to cut government spending. That means they're going to cut your old age security. They're going to cut your disability benefits. They're going to cut everything that matters to you. They're going to cut free healthcare. They're going to do all of these things because they're saying that they want to cut government spending. So that means that the things that are important to you are going to get cut. And then you see on the campaign, liberal leadership saying, we've got to cut government spending. If you can't see the irony there, I don't know what to say to you. And people will come back and they'll say, well, we believe that Poilievre's going to cut all of these services, all of the things that I just mentioned. And you never know. You can't judge a politician by what they say on the campaign trail. It's entirely possible that Poilievre could come in and could, in saying that he's going to cut government spending, cut all the things that are most important to you. That's a reality, and that could happen. But my read on the situation is that these cuts are going to come in the form of cuts to bureaucracy. And that's likely what Carney is trying to refer to here as well. Wasteful spending on ballooning federal government, not to mention the millions of dollars spent on a consulting class that has just grown and grown and grown and provided, like, let's be honest, provided questionable value to the government. We hear all these reports about government agencies saying, well, what was I hired to do then if we're just going to outsource all of this to McKinsey or name your favorite consulting company? That's where I think the cuts are likely to come. And I think that both parties are likely to target those areas in terms of cuts. But it's incredibly dishonest to say, well, we know what Poilievre is going to cut because of the way he's voted on previous legislation. They say he voted against the proposal to increase old age security. And they use this as a say, well, like, now you know his stance on old age security. He said he didn't want to increase it. So what does that make you think of when it comes to thinking about what is he going to cut? This is the sort of way they try to box in people. Now, a lot of people don't follow politics and don't follow these discussions incredibly closely. I, for better or worse, have been. I remember back to this very discussion. There was a bill that was trying to be passed, and the Conservatives didn't support it. The Liberals and the NDP did. The Bloc also didn't support it. You don't hear that as much. This bill was to raise old age security for Canadians. And if you hear that, you're like, why wouldn't anybody vote against that? Maybe it'd be more expensive. Sure, that could be an argument. That wasn't the primary argument in this case. The primary argument in this case was this was a different kind of old age security change. They were going to only give this increase to seniors that are older than 75 or 75 and older, when traditionally old age security has always been 65 plus. There's one class of seniors. So the big argument was, Well, what does it mean for us to make a two-tier system of seniors when it comes to old age supports? Does that mean anything about changing of retirement age over time? There were some legitimate concerns here above and beyond the spending that it would take to make this change, even just for the 75 plus folks. So there's nuance here, and the Conservatives and the Bloc voted against this because they didn't like this idea of creating a two-tiered senior support system. But the Liberals now say, well, he voted against old age security increases, so you know now what he's going to cut. The reality is, for a lot of these things where they say he voted against this or you voted against that, it's a very convenient way of framing things that strips all of the nuance about why those votes were made in the way that they were. Just something to keep in mind. But the irony here is hard to get around. Carney doesn't say how or where the cuts are going to be made. But it's okay for him to talk about cuts. It's not okay for other people to talk about cuts. Because when other people talk about cuts, it's to the things that matter to you. When I talk about cuts, it won't affect you in any way, the way that I'm going to do it. It's a convenient framing. I think in reality, both Conservative and Liberal governments wouldn't cut a lot of the social safety net programs. I think that they would both target federal bureaucracy to actually make those savings. That's my read of the situation. Could be entirely wrong. We could see Poilievre become the prime minister one day and cut public health care, all of these things that they say about him. You never know what's going to happen until you actually see it happen. That's what I'll say. But it just seems a little bit dishonest. And that dishonesty continues, especially in the important conversation about young Canadians. We talk about this poll at the top of the program today. That shifting sentiment says to Canadian politicians, you got to go after young Canadians. They're not thinking the way that they used to. You need to target them as people that you need to convince to vote for you. They're going to be the people that are the next oldest generation as they age. You got to get in their minds and you got to convince them that things are going to be better. Things are going to be good. We've talked about all the ways that young Canadians are disenfranchised right now. You got to do something for them. And everybody recognizes this. Poilievre talks about it a lot. Every single leadership candidate. Carney also in this clip does. And he proposes some like magical solutions. Listen to this and I'm curious what you think.
Young Canadians here, we recognize just how hard the last 5 years have been. Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, we've got to skip forward in this clip a little bit. Here we go.
Good.
Here's the talk about
in
young
the housing
Canadians.
market. People out.
Right.
It doesn't do any good. Young Canadians here, we recognize just how hard the last 5 years have been. Knocked sideways by the pandemic, a housing market running away, lost education, lost job opportunities. It doesn't do any good. Look, it's better than the alternative to say inflation is now back at target, but the level of prices aren't. We've got to get the incomes of young people up. We've got to give them a boost, and we will deliver a direct boost to the incomes of young Canadians so that they can catch up. And we'll do major changes in the housing market so they can also catch up there.
So, sounds pretty good. Massive increase to the incomes of young Canadians, massive change to the housing market. These solutions, like these are the problems. These are the issues that young Canadians are facing. Great job identifying the issues. That's fantastic. Provides these magical solutions with no details on how are you going to do. How exactly are you going to raise the incomes of young Canadians? What massive changes are you going to make to the housing market that makes it more affordable for young Canadians, but also simultaneously doesn't wipe out the equity that a lot of older Canadians are depending on and are likely voting with that in mind? What are these ideas? I would love to know them. And also, if these ideas are so great, even if you're trying to hold them back because you want to wait for a campaign, I can understand that. But if these ideas are so great, why haven't they been implemented? Why hasn't the current government tried to make any of these changes that you're saying you can now make to drastically increase Canadians' incomes? Drastically change the housing market to help everybody? Tell me, Please tell me what these things are. And if you care about Canadians, how come, given that Carney has been an advisor to the Trudeau government, why haven't they been implemented yet? Even if he didn't have any connection to the government of the past decade, it would seem a little bit selfish if you had these magical solutions to hide these plans for yourself so that you can campaign on them while fellow young Canadians and Canadians of all stripes struggle. It seems selfish to me that if you have these magical ideas that are big changes, that you'd be holding on to them. It makes me questionable about what these changes are and how, to the extent to which they actually would help people. But he does say some things that are right. He identifies the issues. He says inflation is a big problem. It's all well and good for us to say inflation. Now we're back in the 1 to 3% range at 2 point something, or maybe 1.8 now. That's a good thing. But it doesn't mean that prices have come down from the years that we saw 7 and 8% inflation at the height of inflation back in 2022. It doesn't bring those prices down. It just stabilizes at a lower level of growth now. He's absolutely right. That's a big issue. Same with the housing market. He says the housing market has run away. Canadians can't afford it. Great job identifying the issues, identifying the symptoms. But what are the root causes? What are the root causes of this? And it ties directly to Mark Carney's past and the industry and the peers he's found himself around. Because a lot of this has to do with decisions made by a small group of centralized people who control the financial policy of the world, when you really look at it, but certainly of Canada, certainly of the US. These are central bankers. The people who control monetary policy can change what the interest rates are, can change how much money there is in the system, and can print money for their own benefit. Yes, they'll say for the benefit of all people, for the benefit of all Canadians, to help the economy. Help the economy for who is my question. If you followed this channel, you know how much we've talked about this. But it is my core belief, one of my core beliefs, that, okay, central banks, they can make these decisions to print hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of a year. Sure, maybe that will have a positive impact on the economy. People will debate how much of a positive impact that will have as you funnel this money into the economy, make lower interest rates incredibly low so that businesses can expand. This is the idea. This is the idea that they're trying to treat this economic issue by printing a bunch of money to stimulate the economy, make people feel like they can go and spend more to get more spending, more economic activity, prop up GDP numbers as well. There are ideas here that make a little bit of sense. But when you look at the ramifications, when you look at the side effects of this, first we saw with this printing an absolute ballooning of all asset prices. We saw real estate prices skyrocket just as this printing was happening. Extremely low interest rates, plus banks have a flood of money to help their capital reserves so that they can issue more and more mortgages for cheaper and cheaper at these incredibly low interest rates. That's going to cause a housing boom. That's going to cause runaway asset price inflation, not just in real estate. We saw it in all kinds of stocks. This isn't just from the Central Bank of Canada. This is from the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank. Everybody did this same policy all at once. So we saw this happen globally, and there's spillover effects from the Federal Reserve, certainly in the States, would have impacted the Canadian economy heavily as well. All this stuff hurts Canadians who are not wealthy. It hurts Canadians who do not have assets. It hurts Canadians who don't have stocks, don't have any kind of precious metals, people who don't have any exposure to real estate or land, people who don't have exposure to, even cryptocurrency, right? We saw that balloon at this point as rates were incredibly low, and we saw this search for yield from all kinds of investors, search for growth when you can't earn as much on a treasury bond or on a government of Canada bond. If you can't earn that risk-free return, you're going to go out and you're going to speculate, and you're going to cause big asset booms that help people who have assets. Meanwhile, average Canadians who maybe are saving in dollars no longer can afford those assets. Makes it harder to purchase a home, harder to get more equity in the stock market. as these prices go up, obviously $100 today can buy you less than $100 after the asset price inflation. It makes it harder for average Canadians to get into this game at the benefit of the already wealthy, who just happen to be the same people who are controlling this monetary policy. Kind of makes you think, right? And it wasn't just asset price inflation we saw. We saw what Mark Carney is talking about in this clip, consumer price inflation, which is the only kind of inflation that central banks actually care about. They're not looking at asset price inflation and the societal impact that has, especially on family formation in Canada when it comes to having stability in terms of where you're living. They don't consider the asset price inflation, but they do talk about the consumer price inflation, the inflation of how much it costs to live. This is cost of living, right? Outside of the real estate side of things. How much does it cost to go and buy groceries? How much does gas cost? How much do these various goods and services cost? And what's the change in those prices? We saw a dramatic run up there, and Carney identified it. He said, hey, even though consumer price inflation is down at 2% today, or roughly 2%, that doesn't mean that people have caught back up. It doesn't mean that the prices inflation of 8% a couple of years ago doesn't mean that that's been wiped out. In fact, we're now just growing at a rate of 2% on top of that growth that happened when inflation was at 8%. So he identifies the inflation, but he doesn't get to this root cause. Why did that inflation happen? Central bankers will love to point and say, well, it's all Russia's fault. It's all this conflict in Russia and Ukraine, or there's this war. For sure, it's a war between Russia and Ukraine. They'll point to that and say, well, that's caused increased prices because of supply chain disruptions, difficulties coming back from COVID with the supply chain. These are the excuses. These are the things that they'll say, look over here, don't look over here, because they never identify the issue that can certainly happen when you double a central bank's balance sheet, when you print money to buy bonds to allow governments to spend, increasing the amount of dollars in the system, meaning that each of those individual dollars can buy less when you compare those dollars to the prices of things, prices of assets, prices of consumer goods. There's never that identification that, hey, our decisions as central bankers and as the managerial elite of the world, our decisions have serious impacts. They're not going to point to that. You don't want any kind of mud on your face. Is that even a saying? Mud on your face? We'll say it. You don't want any kind of mud on your face. You don't want to take any of this blame. We'll point to the external things, even if internally we know there was an impact of our monetary policy on these things that affect average Canadians far more than a lot of the other policies that are made by elected officials, right? You never hear this conversation. And this is the intellectual dishonesty about why things have happened the way that they have. So we have that central bank talking point, but it's not just that. We also see, okay, well, why haven't, he says, we're going to boost young Canadians' wages. We're going to make things better for young Canadians so that they can actually get ahead and maybe catch up to this inflation. That way, well, by the way, we've created. Maybe they can catch up to this inflation. I'm not going to tell you how, but maybe they can do this if we just boost their incomes and make massive action to the real estate market. But I'm not going to tell you what those things are actually, so you can evaluate it. But maybe we can get people to catch up. But why haven't wages kept pace with the cost of living? Well, I think we certainly have to look to a certain extent at the, in my eyes, incredibly reckless temporary foreign worker policy that now the government has gone back on. We look at the temporary foreign worker program. This is where people largely from India were incredibly exploited by the Canadian government. The Canadian government dangled this idea of permanent residency and citizenship, saying that this will help you on your path to becoming a Canadian citizen. They dangled this carrot. Said, hey, everybody come in here, come work for us. Come work at these jobs that they're saying we can't find any Canadians to fill these jobs. We can't, there's such a labor shortage in Canada. This is what was being said in 2022. There's such a labor shortage. Nobody wants to work. There's a big issue here for business. We need to make our economy stronger by making sure we have the workers to work at these jobs so that these companies can be profitable. This was the argument that businesses went to the government with. And as a result, the government said, well, actually, okay, that makes sense. We're going to bring in millions of workers. We're going to grow our population at the fastest rate ever. And this is going to increase our economy. It's going to grow our economy. Not only are we going to have people working in these jobs, but we're also going to have increased demand in the economy from more people living here. It could also be inflationary, right? But that's beside the point. My main issue with this is that I do believe that it has lowered wages for Canadians, especially in entry-level positions all across the economy. It has lowered wages for Canadians. People will say, okay, well, that argument is challenging. I don't see how it is. If you've got businesses that are having trouble hiring people and they say, well, bring in temporary foreign workers, we're actually not going to give them permanent residency, they're going to come help us out for now. To me, that's saying we don't want to pay Canadians a wage that would incentivize them to come and do this job that they don't want to do at the wage that we're currently offering. But if we can bring in other people and say, hey, you're going to get more points on your permanent residence application if you come and work this exploitative job at a lower rate than market, this is what companies are saying they want, and this is what the government delivered. It kept wages low because the only way to bring people to your place of employment and get them to work there, if they're not biting on your current job offer, well, certainly if you offered $50 more an hour, there would be tons of people biting. I'm sure you wouldn't have to go that far. I'm sure you wouldn't have to increase wages that much, but maybe increase the wages of these Canadians that can work here, so that maybe they will be able to keep up with inflation. Barely, maybe. Is that too much to ask for? But there's a bigger argument here, because you've heard me talk a ton about productivity in Canada and how you can look at GDP and economic growth and sure, that might look good. But when you look at it on a per person basis, GDP per capita, well, the quality of living has gone down in Canada. The amount that people are earning on average has gone down in Canada when you look at it on a per person basis. And that productivity, that higher GDP per capita, comes from companies investing and becoming more efficient and being more profitable per each worker that they hire. I would argue that being able to source so much cheap labor so easily does not provide the incentive for companies to become more efficient and to invest in technologies that can make each individual worker more productive for them. Instead, you can just throw more people at the problem instead of throwing more technology at the problem. It disincentivizes this kind of investment that could actually result in Canada having an increasing GDP per capita, increasing productivity, something that the Bank of Canada said is we're in a break the glass type situation right now when you look at how our economy has grown in terms of productivity compared to the States. I would argue that these policies not only lower wages for Canadians in terms of labor supply, but also lower wages for Canadians in the long term as companies don't invest in the ways that they would need to if they had to pay their workers more. If you had to pay a worker more, then maybe you think, hey, maybe it would be wise for us to, instead of hiring more people at a higher wage, perhaps we should invest in more tools, better tools for these people to use on their job. How can we make their jobs more efficient so that each individual worker can be more productive and we don't need this glut of labor supply in order to keep our business profitable? They should have to compete for efficiency to make themselves profitable instead of throwing labor at the problem. All this to say, between the central banks and the monetary policy that nobody voted on, and the temporary foreign worker programs and the suppression of wages and the reduction of productivity, we don't hear these conversations coming out of the politicians. They'll identify the issues. They don't identify the root causes. And that's what makes me incredibly skeptical that we won't see history repeat itself and the same types of people who have suffered will suffer once again. This is what I think will happen, because we don't hear politicians, you hear some politicians sort of hint at it, but I don't see a single politician out there that is identifying things like this. Maybe it's not in the corporation's interests for them to, and maybe there's funding, maybe there's kinds of business interests and different considerations when it comes to getting your voters and the way that you got to talk about things. But this is what makes me so concerned, is not people aren't identifying these root cause issues. they're not talking about the things that got us here, just saying that, yes, there is a problem now, and here's some abstract way that we're going to try to fix it, without saying, here's how we got here. Here's what happened. I'm going to commit to not allow this situation to happen again. Like, let's not talk about Band-Aid solutions. Let's not talk about, here's how we can alleviate the issues that you're now dealing with because of these big things that happened. No, let's talk about the big things. Let's talk about the big things. And let's commit to being a little bit more sober when we're thinking about implementing similar things in the future. You don't hear that conversation. And that's what, like, I'm sure Carney is a good guy. Like, he seems very affable, super easy to talk to, I'd imagine, charismatic, all well and good. To me, this is why I'm concerned, is because as a former central banker, to me, he represents a class of managerial elites who are making these big decisions and aren't really accountable to Canadians, aren't really accountable to people worldwide, right? That's where I've got my problems with Carney and his leadership roles, because there's no way he's going to say, well, central bankers and the decisions made by them have had big impacts on the daily lives of Canadians. It would be a complete betrayal to all of his peers, in my eyes. This is my concern. Maybe it's not justified, but I'm curious what you think about it. All of this, controversial clips, sure, but not the most controversial in terms of things said here. Have you seen this? Have you seen the absolute outrage on Twitter and elsewhere on the internet? Outrage saying that Carney is going to use emergency powers to stop elections in Canada. I'll let you listen to the clip. People have been very, very upset about it. I think it's a little bit overstated, but we'll get into that in a second.
The third thing we have to do, and this goes directly against the pressure we will get from the United States, whatever they do, is build. Build, baby, build. They're going to drill, we're going to build. Some of what we build is going to help with our drilling, to be clear. Some of it's going to be energy infrastructure. Some of it's going to be clean energy. Some of it's going to be trade corridor. A lot of it is going to be housing, the 3 or 4 million new homes that we need across this country. And something that my government is going to do is to use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers of the federal government, to accelerate the major projects that we need in order to build this economy and take on the Americans.
So this is the clip, right? And it's been stripped of the context in other formats. You might have seen this clip on Twitter going around, or X or whatever, sure. You might have seen this clip. Maybe you just saw the end of it where he said, my government will use emergency powers to tackle the projects that we want to tackle. If you just hear that, it sounds very, very alarming. Sounds very, very alarming. Are you going to use the Emergencies Act to stop an election, to take power here? When you put it in the context that I just put it in, with hearing what he's talking about, it makes more sense. He says that we're going to use emergency powers to green light building of different sectors of our economy, maybe to cut through some of the red tape. We're going to do that. We're going to use emergency powers so that we don't need to go through Parliament, sure, in the same way. This could all be true. People still think that he's going to use these emergency powers to tamper with democracy. People are saying this is an affront to democracy because we're going to have an unelected prime minister using emergency powers to make big changes. Sure, I'll hear that argument. Now, the NDP are saying that they believe that Carney will trigger an election at the earliest point so he can build on the momentum of this Liberal leadership campaign. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. But all the outrage about this, maybe it's warranted, maybe it's not, but there is some more hypocrisy here I'm seeing from some of the people. We've got a lot of people online who are applauding the use of executive orders in the States and applauding emergency measures being used to implement an agenda. That's happening largely in the States right now. But I've seen people who are incredibly supportive of that in the States be incredibly outraged about this when it comes to Carney's claims here. Now, I'm not saying people should be able to make major changes in the world without any kind of sober second thought or any kind of parliamentary or Senate procedures, depending on where we're talking about it. I don't think that's great. I think it's kind of shitty. But we should probably get used to it. It seems like that's the way states are governing now. I would say states as in Canada or US, not as in individual American states. This is kind of the way countries are governing themselves right now. And it seems like, have you noticed this? It seems like there is always an emergency. There's always something you can point to say, there's an emergency going on right now. We're going to implement some big changes here. We're going to push forward our agenda, what we want to do, because of this emergency time that gives us the authority to do so. Now, what that policy is can be incredibly different. We look at Doge in the States, unconstitutional maybe, sure, but they're using it to cut down on wasteful spending and probably also, honestly, cutting a fair amount of helpful spending, good dollars going to very, very deserving causes. I'm guessing some of that is going to get caught up in it. So you can use it to do something like that. Or you can use it, like Carney said, to green light big projects to build, like he's saying he'll do in Canada. What are these projects going to be? We don't know. Maybe it'll actually be useful for Canada. Maybe it'll be used for good. I'll watch and I'll wait and I'll see what happens. But you can't make the argument that this is extreme, using emergency measures to do something while simultaneously saying, well, it's good to do in the other case. You can make the argument that I like the agenda that this extreme person is putting into place. I like how extreme this person is being because they align with my goals. You can say that, sure. And you can say, I recognize that the same power could be used by somebody who I don't agree with. But not recognizing the hypocrisy and being okay with one because it serves your agenda and not being okay with the other, I think that's a little bit rich. There's this whole thing about like, what are you planning on doing? What are these projects that you're going to do? Are you going to build a pipeline, build it east to west? We can have more options to sell our energy. Or is it going to be more kind of possibly corrupt financing of things that don't actually get done, but get a lot of money into the hands of other people? I think it's fair to have a little bit of skepticism about how these emergency powers will be used. That's fair. It's tough to make the argument that it's okay to be used in some cases and not in others based on your political preferences. You can make the argument that this shouldn't be done at all. You should have to follow government procedure to a T, legal procedure to a T. Or you can say, well, people voted for it, so make a big change. Carney doesn't have that kind of mandate. Sure, that maybe you could argue that Trump does in the States. But it's an interesting thing to talk about. But you should be skeptical, though. I am skeptical of, okay, well, what are you going to build here, Carney? What are you going to do here? There's a clip that I saw, maybe you saw this too, and I think it's a clip that's entirely reasonable. It's talking about Carney and his climate priorities, and he makes the very honest statement that, hey, the idea is that the people who invest in green technology and green energy, they're going to profit. If we want to solve this climate crisis, we need to attract capital that will invest in companies that are doing renewable energy and all kinds of things to help out the environment. We need the people who are committing themselves to these solutions also to get rich and wealthy to incentivize it. Now, a statement like that isn't radical at face value. You need money to solve problems. You want companies to grow, sure. But it gets messy when the government gets involved to choose who the winners are and to choose who the losers are. Instead of the market deciding, okay, what solutions are truly valuable to us, what solutions are not. When you get the government directing where this money goes and who is the big winner of contracts and who is not, who will get external investment and who will not based on the merits of their ideas, but the idea that we need to push capital in the way that we want to push it to see the results that we want to see. That's where things get dicey, and that's where I get a little bit skeptical. Because after these billions of dollars are invested, it seems to me that in the past there has been a lack of accountability for the actual results that we're wanting to see. You say you got to push capital here so that it will solve problems. You got to push capital here so that we're going to actually get the development of the technologies that are going to save us from this impending crisis. This is the argument. But then you hear stories about, well, funding going to companies like Lion Electric, this battery manufacturer and electric bus and large vehicle manufacturer, got huge amounts of money as a result of their qualifications for certain green investment programs. All kinds of investment, and then we see the story, and you can look it up, Lion Electric. Okay, well then the CEOs, after this surplus of cash gets invested in the company, their shares go up in value and they sell a bunch of them, make a bunch of money, and then you see 6 months later, the company's going through bankruptcy procedures. Where'd all that money go? Where'd all that value go? Why did the people at the top have the ability to sell their shares, which were positively impacted from the decisions made by the government to prop up a business like this? And what kind of accountability is there for it going through bankruptcy proceedings following that? Now, the company has since restarted after going through these proceedings. But this is the type of stuff that makes me skeptical. Is it about actually finding a solution for a problem, or is it about having a very, very alarming problem to a lot of people be the central point for you to then make the argument that we should be sending money to these places? It seems like a convenient excuse, maybe a legitimate problem, but a very convenient problem if you're trying to make a bunch of money. And it makes me wonder, like, are we locked into our way of thinking about these issues because of the financial stakes? We've got these huge asset managers, Brookfield, Carney's connected to, but also BlackRock and all kinds of other big corporations, investment firms, hedge funds, these types of things. This was a big thing of this net zero initiative for investment. Like, we got to push all this money to this place. Do we get locked into thinking we need to go about solving a problem in a certain way, not because that way has the most merit, but perhaps because the most powerful people in the world have invested in those things, and the only way they're going to see growth in their investment is if it pans out that what they've invested in does well in the future. To what extent are we being rational about the way that we solve problems, and to what extent are we captured by these financial interests actually dictating the policy? Is it really about genuine concern, or is it about investing? And is it about using your government lobbying and moral arguments to push public funding into the sectors in which you are already most invested with? Lion Electric is a good kind of example of this. Strip aside all the share selling and things like that and the bankruptcy. But if you are, as an asset manager, invested in all kinds of green technology, and you also have ties to governments and influence over governments, well, then it certainly does benefit you if there are policies that will put a bunch of money into the hands of the companies that you are already invested in. Now, this may not be true. This is why I'm skeptical, because I think that this could be a reality. This could be a reality. And this is something that is a genuine practice of these asset management firms. There's a common phrase in investing, especially on a giant scale like this, and that is get long and get loud. Have you heard this before? Get long and get loud. Getting long, referring to if you are long an asset, that means you own a bunch of that asset. You are in it for the long term, or I guess to say, if prices go up on that asset, you will benefit, rather than being short something where you will benefit if an asset goes down. When you are long something, that means that you will benefit from an asset going up. Get long and get loud. This is the idea. You understand getting long now. Kind of sounds a little bit, pause. Let's get long. All right, let's get it. But get long, get loud. What that really means is invest in an asset class, invest in a specific investment, and then do everything you can to go on the news, talk to governments, get loud about how good the thing that you're invested in is for the rest of the world. That will push more people to invest in it. I think that this is happening right now in AI. To a certain extent, we've got a lot of people with a lot of vested interest in AI being this revolution because of how much money they've invested in AI related sectors. We see a lot of money getting pushed there. To what extent is all of this concern and all of this extreme conversation about AI a result of the reality of what this technology will do? And to what extent is it getting long and getting loud? These are the things that I tend to question. Happened with crypto as well. Any kind of these technology investments, which makes me wonder to what I'm saying to what extent so much. I got to get a t-shirt saying that. It's funny when you talk for over an hour, or I don't even know how long we've been going now, how much you realize patterns in your own speech. We'll try to avoid that, or maybe just do it a little bit less frequently. I wonder if people are even worried about getting to a solution for these problems that they say are big problems, if it would not benefit them financially. Here's a hypothetical. What if we saw tomorrow the greatest inventor of our time come up with an entirely new, revolutionary, clean energy source that was discovered? If that were to happen, would we see all of these asset managers that haven't invested in this new technology, and in fact have tons of investments in other technologies that they're rooting for, would we see them say, hey, here is a good solution, even though we're not invested in it, this is going to save the world from this climate crisis? Would we see that? I don't think so. I think instead we'd see a world where the people who are most heavily invested in other technologies are saying, well, even though this was going to help the world, it doesn't help us, so let's badmouth this new clean renewable energy resource because we don't have a financial stake in it. That's what I think would happen. If it's not in your investment portfolio, it's not the right solution for governments, for other companies, for world organizations to push. Call me a cynic, and maybe I'm the most cynical I have ever been in my life, but I also think I'm the most right. Maybe there's a connection there. At times, I talk about this on YouTube. I enjoy thinking about it, but at times I'm like, man, it would be nice to live in bliss. And I try to do that as much as I possibly can. Look around me, look at the bubble, look at my loved ones who I'm able to spend time with, to the extent that I am. There it is again. Oh man. Look around myself in the world. Is life all that bad in my bubble? What are the positives? You got to think like this, because thinking about all of these big issues and getting cynical like we do on this show, it's good to know what is going on, but I think it's also good to not let it totally capture you. Every waking moment of your everyday shouldn't be spent thinking about this stuff. It's good to know it, but you got to put down the phone, take off the headphones at a certain point and look around you, go out for a walk, see, hey, my neighbors are actually smiling at me. I don't need to be fighting with every single person that I see in the world. It's important to keep that in mind as well when we talk about all of this. But yeah, this is what makes me skeptical about saying we're going to use emergency powers. We're going to use emergency powers to push forward the projects that we want to push forward. Are these emergency powers going to be used to push forward benefits for all Canadians, or will they push forward whatever corporations, investment management firms are invested in? This is my big question. Carney in these clips, I don't think that it's saying that there's going to be no elections, democracy is falling apart. People criticized the Democrats in the States so much for saying this is an affront to democracy. What's happening here? This is the end of democracy. I think saying that similarly, if you're a conservative in Canada about the statements of Carney, has the same level of alarmism to it. I think we got to wait and see what's going to happen before you can make any kind of bold statements like that. Entirely possible that it would happen. But I think being so certain about that is a little bit premature based on what I've seen. What's more interesting from these clips in my eyes is what we talked about here. why are young Canadians suffering? What is the root cause, and why will nobody talk about it? I'm curious what you think about it. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to this channel. If you're on your favorite podcast platform, leave a review, leave a comment. It helps out this show and this channel in getting discovered, having more people see it. If you find this valuable, subscribe, follow, do all that stuff. Again, you can check out the links in the description to find the links to listen to this on Amazon Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts. You can keep on listening on YouTube. I love it. As well as Apple Music. I believe it's on there as well. So check us out wherever you want. Put us on, I say us, it's just me, one man operation here. I don't have a producer behind the scenes flipping between the screens, but that's okay. Listen to me wherever you want to listen to me. It's available now. Just want to let you know that. And let me know in the comments, what do you agree with what I've said? What do you disagree with? We're all trying to learn. We're all trying to connect the dots here. Am I being too cynical? Am I not being cynical enough? Let me know. This has been the Russ Matthews Show. Thanks you for joining, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.